the Chief Justice of India, for doing the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, many people wonder at the complexity of the judicial system in India. The judiciary has a rich heritage. Its development and its reshaping into modern institution is actually a matter of deep interest. An acknowledgement of the need to discover the journey of the establishment of courts in this country led the Supreme Court of India to launch a massive exercise and publish an authoritative reference book on courts of India. May I now request Honorable Mr. Justice S.A. Bobde, Chairman Editorial Board, which published this book, to share his thoughts on courts of India, past to present. After this, it will be.
Good evening to you all. The Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Shri T.S. Thakur, the Honorable Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, the Honorable Law Minister, Shri Prasad, Honorable Justices Jagdish Singh Kehar, Justice Deepak Mishra, the Attorney General for India, Shri Rohatgi, the President of the Supreme Court Bar Association, my esteemed colleagues of the Supreme Court of India, former judges of the Supreme Court of India, Shri Dalveer Bhandari, Judge, International Court of Justice, my former Chief Justice at Bombay, the Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, judges of the Delhi High Court, the Chief Justices of the other High Courts and their judges, the law officers of the Union, the senior members Shri Ram Jethmalani, Shri Soli Sorabji, Shri F.S. Nariman, Shri P.P. Rao, Shri Parasaran, Shri Desai, Shri Diwan, Shri Venugopal, Professors Menon and Professor Bakshi, senior advocates, members of the bar, the media, ladies and gentlemen. How does one introduce a book that spans millennia of judicial history, traverses at least 20 Eastern and Western cultures, and records the most important judicial achievements of the 21st century? Well, I have this unenviable task, and I'm afraid the brief introduction may not do justice to this magnificent and beautiful book, as Mr. Fali Nariman, its first reviewer, and may I say, its first admirer, described to my Chief Justice in his letter. The sheer time frame within which this book had to be conceptualized and proposed to be published presented the biggest challenge. The other great challenge was doing justice to the diverse judicial system in India, the geographical reach, the historical traditions in this diversity, the complexity of its languages. You will be astonished to know the number of languages that have been used in India since the beginning of time in courts, from the Vedic times till date. Cultures and religion. The original idea was to write about judges and their judgments, and lawyers and their arguments too. At a preliminary meeting some pointed out to us the pitfalls of this court, the Supreme Court, commissioning a work of this nature. And there were voices of support too. The warnings cautioned us, and the voices of support encouraged us. We were determined we had to make a start, however small, to tell the history of Indian courts. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely what this book seeks to do. I would describe it as a small yet firm step towards narrating the story of how we inherited this complex web of hierarchical court systems, procedural serpentine rules, adamant lawyers, and sometimes crazy judges. The book gives its readers an insight into the courts of ancient Vedic times, their constitution and procedure. This is the chronological beginning. You might be as surprised as me to learn that adjournments by parties were frowned upon, even in Katyayana's famous court procedures 2000 years ago. I am particularly relieved that Yajnavalkya's prescription that half the cost in a successful appeal be paid by the author of the judgment in appeal does not survive anymore. Who could have dealt with this chapter better than Justice B.N. Sri Krishna? The medieval period saw sophisticated court systems. Sometimes some terms and practices survive till date, like Diwani for civil, Fauzdari for criminal, Dasti service, court, Shiristadars. You will read in this chapter on medieval times about the benevolent rule of Akbar the Great, the great commitment of Jahangir and Shah Jahan to justice, and the sensitivity of the Mughals in establishing courts manned by appropriate judges, learned in the personal law of their litigants. It will be interesting to note that the Portuguese were the first to ban sati in India, and that the French formally introduced the registration of births and deaths. The Elihu Yale, was the founder of the Yale University. He was charged with extortion by the East India Company, and it is their delayed attempt to recover money from him which resulted in limitation law being extended to the Madras province. I could go on and on, but this is a glimpse into what the book has. Then the rich history of the Charter Trinity, Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, is set out in all its glory. Also that of the princely courts like Baroda, Mysore, and some lost high courts such as Awadh, Rangoon, and the short-lived Nagpur High Court. The book attempts to give a crisp overview of all the 24 high courts and their significant verdicts. You will be delighted to know that the day after the Privy Council decided the Tengalai Veru Vadagalai case. The London edition of the Times christened the author Lord Macmillan Iyengar. For settling, this is what the headline said, for settling a centuries-old Indian temple dispute based on his grasp of Vaishnavite philosophy and rituals. One of the disputes between the two communities was the right to apply namam on the forehead, not of the Lord, but of the temple elephant. Interestingly, this dispute came to an end when a brilliant single judge of the Madras High Court in the 1990s decided that both communities could have their own separate elephants. And thus ended a century-old annual dispute. In the chapter on trials, many of the great trials are here. Beginning with the poignant trial of Bahadur Shah Zafar in 1858, who was tried at the Diwan-e-Khas, from where his ancestors once dispensed justice as emperors, up to the Bombay blast case in 1990s. The sedition trials of Lokmanya Tilak and Gandhi are here. So is the Alipur bomb blast case. The Bhagat Singh trial, the INA cases, the startling Bhaval Sannyasi case in the 1930s. That trial, those of you who know it, is so startling that the other day my Chief Justice was saying that we should inspire somebody to make a movie on it. I hope it happens. The pages are interspersed with personal stories about the 10 most famous litigants in the Supreme Court, from A.K. Gopalan to Cooper to Shah Banu and Raj Narayan. You will also find in these pages the story of the President of India being cross-examined in the Supreme Court. He was actually asked to speak slowly so that the stenographer could take it down. His reply was that his stenographers were faster than the court stenographers. The book tells us of the hermit-like Aurobindo Ghosh, when kept in solitary confinement, said that he was delighted to be kept like that. The dawn of the Republic, the Constituent Assembly, and the idea of a true democratic and constitutional court system are also described in some detail. We have tried to capture the vibrant history of the Supreme Court through its most significant and controversial judgments, and some interesting facets not commonly known. While poring through historical records, I am telling you the joy of having been part of the making of this book. While poring through some historical records, we stumble upon the fact that Justice T.L. Venkatrama Iyer was the first bar appointee to the Supreme Court, and that he was a Carnatic music exponent who trained even M.S. Subbalakshmi and D.K. Pattamal in some rare Carnatic compositions. One thing this book unmistakably reveals is that India has had an established system of administration of justice throughout the ages, right from the Vedic times to the present day. I remember a reply which Chief Justice Venkatachalaya gave to a foreign critic when he was a member of the Human Rights Commission. That critic had called India an undeveloped country. Justice Venkatachalaya's reply, quoting Hodgson, was, "What an extraordinary use of words that is. India is poorer, certainly, but her civilization is older and may well prove more durable. India was developed when our northern countries, this is Hodgson saying, when our northern countries were forests and bogs and the home of savages." Justice Venkatachalaya told me that these words are from a book called The Diseconomics of Growth. Now, to mention the complex business of having actually produced such a book. We estimate at least 4,000 hours of work went in writing, editing, designing, proofreading, and indexing. Not to speak of those few thousand emails, exchanges with people in India and abroad. We lived in dread of those panic calls about deadlines, suffered endless conversations about the right phrases, right adjectives, capitalization and italics, and were bewildered by discussions about design and aesthetics. I remember the Chief Justice once spending about 20 minutes on the placement of a comma and full stop. Lately we began to think that the difficulties and the pain became so much that we might need an obstetrician to release the book. We can now look back with a smile, but those months were as intense as any. Before I proceed with the significant task of acknowledging the efforts of all our contributors, I would like to mention a quick word about the nature of the book. Although it is commissioned by the Supreme Court, the book does not reflect the official view of the Indian judiciary. As is well known, we do not speak through books, but through judgments. In fact, we took the painful decision to refrain from mentioning all the great post-independence judges and lawyers, primarily because we were cautioned in that preliminary meeting. Their number and work merits an exclusive volume, and the Chief Justice has said that we are going to have a second volume. I hope it comes true. Let me emphasize that this volume is not meant to be an all-encompassing historical work, but is meant to be a hitchhiker's guide to the Indian judicial galaxy. We have cherished and preserved what many a litigant would rather forget. It is finally my pleasure to thank all the numerous contributors to this book. The book had a dozen primary writing contributors and at least 70 contributors from various high courts. Too many I am afraid to mention individually, but they are all thanked profusely in the acknowledgements in the book. I reiterate that. First, of course, the Chief Justice of India, who not only galvanized this project, but gave it shape. This book was lying in the doldrums. There were only two members, myself and Justice Rohinton Nariman, who were members of a committee which never met. It is when Chief Justice Thakur took over that there was sudden energy to this book. He often spent a long time he spared no effort, Sam, Dam, Bhed, but never done. We cannot be grateful enough to him. We particularly remember the sumptuous dinner he hosted on a critical juncture of the book for meeting a particular deadline. And he could not resist inserting an Urdu couplet by the last Mughal, Bahadur Shah Zafar, in the book. May I remind His Lordship that now the book is complete. Many of my colleagues in the Supreme Court helped us to identify resources and people and were so crucial in bringing this project together. Although in straight sentences and meetings, they all helped, and a special thanks must go to Justice Deepak Mishra, Justice Chalameshwar, who spent a long time reviewing a particular chapter, Justice Ranjan Gogoi, Justice Pinaki Ghosh, and Adarsh Goel. I was delighted to have on the editorial board Justice Lalit and Justice Nariman from the Supreme Court. I am grateful for the care with which they reviewed the text and design, and I am not surprised that my brother Rohinton Nariman read the entire manuscript in a day, detecting spelling mistakes and factual errors. On behalf of the entire court, I express our thanks to the Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Sri Venkaiah Naidu, also to Sri Ravi Shankar Prasad, who doesn't hold that portfolio now, but in the earlier portfolio was most supportive of the book and in fact kept on inquiring whether we need any help. The publication division helped a lot. They are the publishers of the book. I thank particularly Dr. Sadhana Raut, Mr. Vinod Meena, and Ms. Dharini Mishra. The other members of the editorial board, senior advocates Raju Ramchandran, Indu Malhotra, Sanjay Hegde, Madhavi Diwan, and the young advocates K. Parmeshwar and Gautam Bhatia worked tirelessly. Parmeshwar and Gautam easily wrote large parts of the book and edited large parts between them. The project was superbly coordinated by Justice Ravindra Bhatt, who deserves all our appreciation. I think he started the day with the book in his head and ended it and slept on it. He contributed as an author, coordinated between all the various parties involved, and you know what that means. Over 100. Sourced pictures, and you'll find pictures from the National Archives, you'll find them from the British Museum, and even putting to test his photography skills by contributing a photo or two. Two people who learned about how courts function while working with us, that judges and lawyers do indeed belong to a different universe, were Dr. Yashaswini Chandra, our editorial consultant, and Ms. Malini Saigal, our designer. I think they were quite mystified at the contradictory instructions and views that came from judges and when the views about the same subject came from lawyers. But they brought the much needed professionalism and technical expertise to enable us to successfully complete this project. They accomplished the difficult task of organizing and designing it beautifully with minimum fuss. Our designer Malini felt that the real design challenge was to create an aesthetic that gave a sense of history as well as looked contemporary. There were hundreds of faded archival photographs, and an equal number of sparkling digital images to fit together. The time constraint was constant, and the editorial team was working under pressure. A new chapter arrived as one finished, but not in sequential order, which meant we had no clear idea till the end of the total number of pages. We were fortunate to have as our photographer Vinay Thakur, a fourth-generation lawyer turned professional photographer, his wife Anju and his son Amog, who alternatively traveled for 100 days and spent 800 hours with their cameras to bring out some outstanding pictures of our judicial structures, many of which are heritage buildings in their own right. He was a prime suspect with the police in most cities for having clambered upon the highest point of these structures to get a shot or two. Indeed, the photo with the grandest view of the Supreme Court was taken by Vinay not from an adjoining building, but the raised snorkel of the fire brigade. For Vinay, this project was purely a labor of love. Thank you. Apart from the primary contributors among the editorial board, other prominent contributions were by Justice Sri Krishna, I mentioned earlier, Justice D.M. Dharmadhikari, Justice Sirpurkar, Justice Anirudh Bose, Justice Jayamala Bagchi of the Calcutta High Court, Justice Gautam Patel of the Bombay High Court, and Justice Narendra Chapalgaonkar and Justice Sukumaran, former judges from Bombay and Kerala. Professor Ishwar Bhatt, Dr. Jyoti Dogra Sood, Dr. Latika Vashisht, Dr. Sanjay Jain, Senior Advocates Arvind Datar, N.L. Raja, Advocates Sudesh Pai and Gopal Shankar Narayanan, and Vikram Raghavan from the World Bank, Pratyush Kumar from the National Law University, Delhi. Justice Sri Krishna, like his namesake, brought his expertise in Sanskrit and knowledge of ancient texts to contribute to the first chapter. Thanks also to Mr. Fali Nariman, Mr. Soli Sorabji, Mr. Ram Jethmalani, Mr. Andhyaru Jina, Mr. P.P. Rao, Mr. Gopal Subramaniam, Mr. Mukul Rohotgi, Mr. Rajiv Dhawan, and K.K. Venugopal for their suggestions and help. Mr. Venugopal threw open his personal collection and said that any of you can come any time of the day or night and take whatever you want for this book. I must mention Dr. Thomas Matthew, who is the Additional Secretary to the President. He brought a lot of energy to this project. He imposed impossible deadlines through some charts which we called PERT charts, and which none of us could adhere to. But it galvanized us into action and brought us to realistic timelines with his consent and many times without. Thank you, Dr. Matthew. We must also thank Supriti Narayanan and Shadan from the LexisNexis. And last but not the least, the backbone of the project was a full-time team of administrative staff of the Supreme Court led by the Secretary General, Ravindra Methani, and the librarian, Dr. Srivastav. They were assisted by Court Master Rakesh Bhatt, Junior Court Master Himanshu Gaur. The Chief Justice directed recruitment of special law clerks who were Shashank Tripathi Abhijit Sadikale, Abhay Pratap Singh and Manisha Singh, who did not have a clue about how to produce a book like this but learnt everything hands-on in the course of a few months. And I know there must be somebody I've forgotten to mention, but all that I want to say is thank you for everything each one of you have done, and I hope you enjoy the reading of this book just as we enjoyed making it. Jai Hind.